Hello, and welcome back to the Interesting Lawyers Podcast, brought to you by Lawyer Better Consulting. I'm your host, Russ Adler. And today, as usual, we have an interesting lawyer. Not only just an interesting lawyer, there's lots of them, but someone whom I've known for a long time, and I particularly admire her for many reasons, but especially because of the fact that she's a divorce lawyer. And I have no clue how anyone could ever do that job. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce my old friend and today's guest, Camille Coolidge.
Morning, Russ.
Camille,
nice to see you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you again.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
Really?
Most of the time.
It's not what my ex-wife says. But Camille, as I was saying, first of all, you have a memorable last name, Coolidge. Any relation to President Calvin Coolidge by any chance?
There is a very distant relation. He's like a great uncle or something to that effect, but it really doesn't give me any real benefit other than it's just a nice soundbite for conversation. But I can't even get a good table in the restaurant with that name anymore. So.
Oh, you got my attention with it when we first met, and it actually does differentiate you and make you more rememberable. So I'm always talking to lawyers about branding and marketing and all that. I think from a marketing perspective, it's probably a good thing, even though you may not realize the benefits.
Well, it's funny because there's a certain demographic that will always ask me, "Are you related to former President Calvin Coolidge?" And now. The next generation is, are you related to Jennifer Coolidge?
Who's that? I don't even know who that is.
She's an actress. She's been on Legally Blonde. She's on like White Lotus or something, and she's hilarious, by the way. And as far as American Pie, yep. But I don't know if I'm related to her, so I can't. I think that might actually get me a good table someplace.
Well, congratulations on that, because at the end of the day, perception is everything.
Yes.
So it's all good. So, Camille, as I was mentioning earlier, okay, of all of the different areas of civil practice, the one that I never understood how anyone could do it, probably because I could not do it, I just couldn't handle it, was family law. And it's something that you have been doing for 25 years. And it's not just a job for you. I know you have a passion for it and a passion to give back, which we're going to get into. But my first question out of the box is, how the hell do you do it? And stay so nice and happy and calm, at least outwardly.
Please perpetuate that rumor that I'm nice and calm.
Okay.
That I'd like for that to get around. It's difficult. I would be lying if I said that it was easy, and it's not. I joke about the fact that when I was in law school, people would ask me, like, what area of law are you going to be? Because, young lawyers and wannabes, we have these grand ideas of being these fantastic lawyers. And what kind of law are you going to practice? And I said, anything but family law. And here I am. It is difficult. You get... For a lawyer, the best situation is you get good people at their worst, because divorce and family conflicts, it is their worst, and it's something that people don't plan for most of the time, and they find themselves in this storm, and all they want to do is just stop and make it go away.
Yeah.
And my job is to get them through the storm.
So it is the most heavily emotionally charged litigation of all the other types of litigation, I suppose, correct?
It is. But, and you're dealing with kids, which are very emotionally driven issues with the kids' issues. And then you have money. And people get very emotional about money and giving it away to anybody.
Right.
So,
in addition to personal feelings towards their future ex-spouse, at least when it all starts. So that's the typical way that it looks at the beginning.
Yes.
Also, a lot of emergencies. You get a lot of phone calls on nights and weekends, and just generally, what types of emergencies are you faced with? Whether you think it's an emergency or not, the client does because they called you at 3 a.m. or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I get my definition of emergencies, and the definition of emergency in the courts are certainly different than emergencies from the clients. But we get calls from one parent has not drop the kid off for their time sharing or disappears. Like I've had a case where a parent didn't want the child going skiing with the other parent, even though they had done it every year prior. And so she just took off with the kid. And so you go into court under emergency pickup order, and you go and you have to go and get the child. And it's a fine line sometimes, because you don't want to traumatize your kid by having the sheriff's department show up and pick up your kid. But you also don't want to set a precedent that this is acceptable behavior. Because
Right. But I know that sometimes things can get really petty. A couple fighting over a pair of candlesticks, or a chair, or a pet, although pets, I know that in the eyes of the law, pets are considered personal property, no differently than a candlestick or a chair, and people find that hard to swallow. But I'm sure you get plenty of
I've
calls
had,
and issues about who gets the pet, who gets Fido.
I've had to explain that to a lot of people with regards to pet. I'm a huge pet lover, so it's an issue that I'm passionate about, and I try to advise my clients to do the right thing for the pet, not for their whatever reason to get back at the other. One of the first things I tell all my clients, and the same thing goes with pets or children, is never hate your spouse more than you love your children. And it really does get lost sometimes in translation when people are in this heat of battle, and then they get lost in the battle.
How do you do it, though? How do you not bring these issues home with you? And, and I mean...
Sometimes I do. Most of the time I tell people to knock it off. I don't pull any punches in my office. So if my clients are behaving like unaccompanied minors, I will be the first one to tell them, knock it off, stop it.
Yep.
And that's, probably not the correct way to do it, but I've been doing this so long, I don't care. So you come to my office because you need to hear the things that I tell you, not because you want to hear it.
Right. And it sounds like it's a very big area where it's all about the relationship, and it's all about the ability to communicate. And not all lawyers can do that. And a lot of divorce lawyers who I've known or known of have been basically miserable people who I always felt, this was their fate. But, you broke that mold in my mind, and I just wanted to let you know I've always admired you for that. And thanks again for coming on the show today. So I'd like to visit with you about a couple trends that are going on in the area of family law, not just in Florida, but in some other states nationally. And then I want to ask you some other questions about just what's going on in our society and what's going on with the with children as they grow older, people getting into relationships, getting married at all, things like that. Because I think you'll agree things are quite different than they were even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. I think there's been a lot of changes. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about was, I know that at least in Florida, and again, there's a push in other states, the concept of permanent alimony is no more, and the tender years presumption, where a mother used to be presumed to be the more suitable parent for custody purposes, is no more. It's a 50-50 split, and a couple of other things. Can you just, in a nutshell, sum up for us how the law has changed and what you think of that? And again, those wherever they have changed, not necessarily just in Florida.
Well, I think that as our society evolves, I use the term loosely, we evolve. I think the trend has been that, especially in the courts, that it's been more accepted now that it is 50-50. I think the legislature has just started to catch up with that. And I think that's been the trend throughout. Before, when I first started this, women tend to be the presumed majority time-sharing parent. And I always had a problem with that. And as a result, I typically represented men. I think what we're seeing in society now is you need both parents. You need mom and dad. And you start with 50-50. You're not a 25% parent. You are 100% parent, and they're 100% parent, and you guys have to work this together.
But it doesn't always work out that way.
It doesn't. Some people, again, they get caught up in the fight, and the kids get, unfortunately, are collateral damage, which is why I think you have so many young people who, one, may not want to get married, and two, certainly don't want to have kids. I was just looking at some statistics. I think the last statistic I saw was about 46% of unmarried Americans want to get married, but only 28% of them want to have children.
Right. A lot of things have changed in terms of demographics and people's attitudes toward the traditional institution of marriage. And I have some statistics from the Pew Institute, and they publish a lot of data. But one of them that's really troubling is that roughly 6 in 10 young men report being single. And many of those young men have never been in a sexual or even a intimate or close relationship with someone else. And I think that's pretty telling, and that's pretty scary.
It is, but I think it's a product of what happens in their lives as they're growing up and the examples of the family unit as they get older and what they want for themselves and what they're capable emotionally of absorbing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you see. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen cases where I'm like, oh, this is going to be bad for this kid as they get older, and
Have you been right over time as that's played out with anyone that you've followed up with?
Yeah, I have. I have been right. I've been pleasantly surprised at some of it. I've seen cases that I thought were going to go completely south after the case was over. And once the fight was over and the judge made the decision, a year later, they're co-parenting, they're getting along.
By the way, speaking of pleasantly surprised, I'd like to visit with you for a minute about my limited experience doing family law cases. Okay, I think I handled one uncontested divorce where they couldn't even find the other spouse. So it seemed to me
that's
that
the best
family
case
law
scenario, by the way.
was pretty easy. But then I did favors for 2 friends. Each of them, it was like their sister, I think both their sister, who they were in a relationship with a guy and things got a little rough physically and they wanted restraining orders. And so they asked me to handle the restraining order cases, the temporary restraining orders, TRO. And I always wanted to help people, and I didn't really make money billing on cases or anything like that. So, of course, I said, sure, I'll be happy to handle it. No charge, don't worry, but I'll do it as a favor because you're my friend. And you know what they say, Camille.
No good deed goes unpunished.
No good deed goes unpunished. But guess what? Here's the pleasantly surprising part. That didn't happen. There was no punishment. And, in fact, they both had happy endings in the sense that both couples... first of all, the restraining order petition was vigorously opposed. And anyone who knows about temporary restraining orders like you knows that most of these are unopposed. And then even the ones that are opposed, very few of them actually go to a trial or a hearing, where the judge hears everything and decides whether to give a permanent restraining order or not, looks at all the circumstances and everything like that. Both of them went to trial. And these processes are set up so that people can do these things without getting lawyers. There were lawyers on both sides. So I went to trial in both cases, and I won both cases. And both couples to this day are now married. So that was what the pleasant surprise was to me. Here I am. They're fighting
unusual, yes.
tooth and nail, emotions flying. I never want to see him again. I hate him. I hate her, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes, they say love is a strange thing. That's what it took to bring these couples together as married couples. Have you ever heard such a crazy story before?
I have. I've had 2 reconciliations. I've had 2 cases that we were in the trenches in this case, and a couple months down the road, they get back together, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually short-lived, but I've had a couple actually that have stayed together. You get people that have maybe some substance abuse problems, and then they get through recovery, and then their relationship evolves into something else. I have seen more restraining orders over the last few years than I have probably in my entire career.
Wow. We'll get to that in a second, but on the topic of reconciliation, a very high-profile reconciliation is going on. Taylor Swift's parents are getting remarried. They both look like very nice people. I know nothing about their original backstory, and the only thing I know that's really changed is their daughter is now a billionaire, and doing a lot of good for the world. And I just think personally the whole thing is just a big feel-good story, and so is that. And I was really happy to see that.
Well, we always hope people can reconcile if they can work out their differences. I mean, I don't. I will have people call me all the time and say, well, I'm thinking about a divorce, and well, call me, because I'm not going to call you. You call me, and when you're ready, you come back and talk to me. I'm not forcing somebody into something. And I've kicked people out of my office. I kicked them out and said, you're not ready. Come back to me when you're ready.
But on the other side of the coin, there are other lawyers who have different motives in mind and different motivations. Because I remember so many times you'd hear about a couple having difficulties, and then they would work everything out. Mm-hmm. That's until they got the lawyers involved, and then it would always fall apart, be contentious. And I wondered how much of that was profit motive on the part of the lawyer to generate some billings, to make some hay, because the more hay that they make, the more money they make. And I always thought that was a big disincentive for certain lawyers who lack scruples. Of course, yourself not included. I consider you to be the best of the best.
I appreciate that. I think that's my reputation. I hope it is. That's certainly what I'd like to project. But I can tell you that in any case that I've had, I can tell you how that case is going to evolve and develop and progress simply by who the other attorney is. When you've been in this area of law for as long as I have, it's hard to meet someone that you haven't met before. And you can definitely see how the posture of a case is going to evolve by the other attorney. And if you don't know them, you pick up the phone and you call them and you talk to them, and you'll get a good idea and a good feel for that person in that first phone call.
Right. So I know there's that group of lawyers that you know and you trust, but it's probably a small group. Because, I had friends like that as well, and I trusted some people, but most of them, I wouldn't trust anyone because, you know what I mean?
There's certain...
Too many people go back on their word.
I wouldn't trust if they told me water was wet. So...
yeah, I hear you.
It's sad, but you've got to be able to read your room.
Yep. So, Camille, I know that in the macro, in the big picture, marriages are going down. Fewer and fewer people are getting married. Elon Musk has said that the greatest existential threat to mankind, to our race or species, is population decline. And so, if you and then you have all of these young men who are never had a relationship or no interest in having a relationship. Some of those people go off the deep end in various ways. And then another statistic I heard is within about 10 to 12 years, there's going to be more people over age 65 than under age 18. So putting all of that together with the fact that marriage is no longer really a prerequisite to having kids, what is your take on the present moment from a family lawyer's point of view versus, let's say, 10 years ago?
Well, you definitely see more people doing prenuptial agreements. You definitely see more people in paternity actions, per se, than you do the other side of the coin, which is the dissolution of marriage. But, if you've got young people who aren't getting married and not having children, they don't need me, so I don't see them. It's definitely a trend of, I have a kid, and she's a 20-something, and her and her boyfriend have been together for a very, very long time. And typical, clock is ticking, and kind of like to have a grandkid someday. They're like, yeah, we don't want to talk about it. And so it does. I see it on my own family. So it definitely is a trend.
You get involved in or see a lot of custody battles between unmarried parents? I know everyone has different circumstances, but what percentage of custody cases that are pending nowadays, just a rough percentage, do you think are from married parents versus unmarried? And I realize some people might say, what's the difference? It doesn't matter. And I think that sometimes it doesn't matter, but I think a lot of times it also does.
I can give you probably a rough statistic just from my office. I'd say 60% of my office's cases are paternity cases, not divorces. I mean, I have divorces and then I have post-judgment issues, but probably 60% of them are all dealing with unmarried parties.
So, by the way, one more war story. Let me tell you how I learned about a paternity case, and it was not because I was sued for paternity. I've admitted paternity for my children and my grandchildren. They'll look just like me. So
There's no denying it.
It's undeniable. But when I bought my second house in Fort Lauderdale, the guy, he was living there with a woman and their child, and a few days before closing, he broke up with her and said the house is sold, and you need to find another place to live with the baby. And she then sued him for paternity. And she had a high-profile lawyer who did not have a good reputation and will remain unnamed. But he took the position that this child is entitled to grow up in the lifestyle that she became accustomed to because she was born in that house and all of that. And so here I am, waiting to close. I've closed on my other house. I got all this stuff in the move. I'm literally waiting to move in, and here comes this paternity case. And I actually felt really badly, for the mother and for the child. They were not married. And of course, the case was ultimately dismissed because the judge said, well, if you were married, that would be a viable, valid argument to make. But since you were not married, you don't have any of those rights. And, I got to tell you, it was kind of a tough thing for me to grasp. I didn't really know that, never really handled those cases. And I just felt badly about it, and I felt a little guilty for moving into the house.
Yeah, it is as simple as far as the law is concerned. If you're not married, it's a child support case. It's a custody case and a child support case. I've had cases where the one parent is far more wealthy than the other, and the statute and the child support guidelines gives a minimum of what that is, and then I've explained to clients too, this is what you have to do, maybe not what you should do, okay, because it is your kid.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to them. It's not up to the courts to do that. So
yeah, and I know every situation is different, but the one that comes to mind when we're talking about a big disparity in assets between one parent and another is Elon Musk.
Yep.
Back to Elon Musk. I know he had several marriages. I think he remarried one of his wives at one point. Short marriages, probably not an easy guy to be married to because talk about constantly being distracted, albeit with incredible, great thoughts, but about technology and all of that.
Somebody referred to him as the great worrier.
Yeah, the great warrior. Yeah, quite the character. But I know that, and it's been all over the press lately, that he's had several children with several different women. And I just saw an article about maybe 6 months ago that his father, who I think is in his 70s, he's having another child with yet another woman, and their whole attitude, or Elon Musk's whole attitude, is that population decline is what's going to be the end of our species, and so it's a good thing, to reproduce, to have great fecundity, as my father used to say. I don't know if you remember that word from high school biology, but fecundity is the ability of a species to reproduce. So whenever someone would have several children, my father's comment would be, "Oh, they have great fecundity." So, what are your thoughts about that? And how does it play out for children? When the headlines fade and it drops out of the news cycle, and now is throwing money at it? I mean, obviously it must help, but is it really a substitute? Who pays the price here?
Clearly not. I mean, he, even in Elon Musk's situation, he's got children that he's estranged from. Money doesn't fix everything. And there's definitely more to being a parent than reproduction, simple reproduction. It's unfortunate, and I've read some of his stuff, and he believes, again, like you said, that population decline. I think we've got little over 8 billion people in a world population,
Mm-hmm.
and he believes that the planet can sustain 80 billion in population. I don't see that, but it's above my pay grade as far as that's concerned. But just simply having children is not, I don't think, the answer. If you just have children and they aren't productive members of society and they are drawing from society rather than adding to society, then you failed in that regard.
Yeah, and I know that time and technology and innovation have also brought a huge change. I mean, how many divorce cases have you seen that have been filed as a result of something being on social media or something being on someone's phone? Things that really didn't exist, even,
First thing I do.
15 years ago or so.
First thing I do.
What,
when
subpoena the other spouse's phone?
I just go right on, because most people are, their social media is public, and you go right on and you see what's on their social media, and it's amazing to me what people put on social media.
Well, and I know that even in personal injury litigation, the first thing the defense goes after is the plaintiff's social media content, even the stuff they've deleted, because nothing's really ever deleted. They can get all of that. So that must have been a big boon, a big boost for family lawyers in terms
Absolutely.
of, and that probably continues to this day. But what about the whole issue of children being so influenced by social media? Scott Galloway always talks about these scenarios where a young girl might Google something or put something in Facebook or on one of these platforms about suicide, and then the algorithm will feed that person content about different ways to kill yourself. And I think that's one of the big reasons they're trying to get legislation. But how has that played out from your point of view, from your vantage point as a family lawyer, when these things come to roost?
Well, I mean, we look at everybody's social media as it relates to kids' issues and ability to pay alimony and needs and things of that nature. I don't think it's as much. I don't think it's as important in a family law case as some people may think it is, because we're a no-fault state.
Oh, right. So you just have to show it's irretrievably broken. You don't have to go on trial as to why.
Yeah.
Aren't some states trying to reinstate, to change the no-fault divorce thing and turn it back to a fault system?
Well, there are a lot of states that still have a fault system. Florida is one of the no-fault states. I think I think from a public policy perspective, I think that the trend is to go to a no-fault, not a fault. Because, we don't always want to take accountability for our mess-ups, so we just want a do-over.
Right. But having to prove that and drag people through the mud, it must just be even more of a horror show than it is in Florida already.
Yep. Or in any state. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come into my office saying, well, my spouse did this, this, and this. I said, well, were your children with them when they were doing it? No. Well, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
So I say that it may have some tangential effect on the case, but I think lawyers can sometimes make these things a lot more complicated than they need to be. I look at it as a unwinding of a corporation, and it's a 50-50 split, both in your assets and your kids. And at the end of the day, hopefully you can go and do business with this person again without entering business with them.
So one thing I've often wondered, I know that there could be prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, which usually address the division of assets should things not work out. But what about marriage for a term? Like, Camille, I love you. Will you marry me for a 5-year term? Kind of like
like a lease,
like
lease
leasing
to own.
a car. Well, I'll do a 3-year with the right of renewal. Why don't can you just explain for our listeners who may not know, including your host, why don't they have that? It just makes sense.
I think I think at that point it becomes not only absurd but sublime. Why get married at all? If you want to have a contract with somebody, a civil contract. I mean, we have domestic partnership, and you have domestic partnership agreements, but it's not a court enforceable kind of contract as far as that's concerned. What would your damages be if the lease, if you wanted to break the lease earlier? What would the damages be?
I think it depends on the condition of the vehicle when you return it. So maybe that's analogous as well.
How many miles?
I don't know. I haven't thought
No.
about it, but I think it's intriguing because I just think that when it comes to these cases, there are certain things that just, well, first of all, that will never be replaced by AI. I don't think we had a lawyer in here, Brent Britton, who's a intellectual property transactional lawyer, and he said that AI is going to basically eliminate transactional lawyers like him. But you are in one of those fields where you'll never be replaced by AI. Yes, it might do a little bit more of your work now, but it always requires that personal touch and that human connection. Do you agree? Or maybe it'll be
I do.
Android. Maybe there'll be
Well,
robot lawyers. I
I
don't know.
think as it relates to the transactional aspect of law with the marital settlement agreements and the parenting plans, I think that AI is definitely getting involved in drafting those types of agreements and helping lawyers draft, younger lawyers, I think, for the most part, draft those types of agreements. But it's a slippery slope to rely on that because every family is different. And every family has nuances that need to be addressed in these agreements, and
Right.
and that's why I don't think our area of the law is going to be that affected by it. It might streamline some of the agreements, but
Yeah.
we're a court of equity, so which is a little bit different, and the courts have a lot of discretion in determining credibility of the parties and
Right.
what should be done.
Correct.
Within the confines of the statutes.
Yeah, and we were speaking about
based on-
that close, intimate relationship with clients, because only then will many of them open up to you and really tell you these things. How could they ever have a relationship like that with AI? Although I know that now there are, AI assistants, AI girlfriends, and all of these novel AI concepts, but I think it's still early. So maybe I'll bring you back in a couple of years, and we can look back and laugh at how right we were,
You're
or
gonna
how
ha-
or
you're
how
gonna
wrong
have to
we
bring
were.
me back from some exotic place in a couple of years. I can tell you that. But,
really?
yeah, there's a shelf life for family law attorneys, I think. So, and I'm reaching the end of that. But
Is it a shorter or longer shelf life than other practice areas?
I think it's a shorter one. I commiserate with some of my colleagues all the time that after a while, it's hard to do this job for extended periods of time. And the things that you see and what people are capable of, it's hard not to be jaded sometimes, but and keep a separation. Like you said, how do you not bring this stuff home with you sometimes? And sometimes
Yeah.
it's impossible not to.
But because it's so charged, and especially since, like in Florida, you don't even need a carrying permit to carry a weapon. It's scary. I've always considered family lawyers to be like an endangered species. I can think of two situations that happened just in Broward County while I practiced. One where a future ex shows up at the door of the wife's lawyer and just shoots him dead, and another one happened during a deposition. And you
Yeah,
probably
I
remember that
remember,
one as
yeah.
well. And, it's horrible.
Well, they don't
So,
want to show up at my door. You know what's at my house.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. We'll leave the rest.
I have my own personal security team, so at my home.
I would definitely not. You know the rest. Wow. So, also, South Florida in the past several years, the demographics have changed. People are moving here from other states.
Yes.
And they're bringing their families, they're bringing their businesses, and they're bringing their money.
Yes.
And I'm sure that means there's a lot more high-end divorce cases going on, just statistically. Do you notice that in South Florida?
Yeah.
They follow the trend?
I do. I mean, most of my cases tend to be high net worth cases, but I think it's hard not to be in South Florida because the cost of living here is so expensive. So it tends to be that. So a lot of my clients are high net worth. So you definitely see
But
it.
unfortunately, you're not allowed to charge contingency fees, right?
No.
It's just like, imagine saying to a client, "Oh, your husband's a billionaire. I'll just take 30% of whatever I get you." Why is that?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's how the whole plaintiff's personal injury
Right.
field is structured. Keys to the courthouse for anyone, regardless of their assets. Why not in divorce?
Because then you are borderline a party. And I don't think you can't represent your client and be vested in the outcome, and not in a family law case. I mean, it just wouldn't be. I don't think it'd be ethical.
Conflict of interest.
Yeah, I don't think. I don't think you could adequately represent a client if you've got a vested interest in the outcome, financial interest in the outcome.
And interestingly, and it surprised me to learn this, but the ethical rule used to be that lawyers should not have sexual relationships with their clients. And I know that was recently, well, not recently, but it was changed in the recent, past 10 years or whatever. They changed should not to shall not. They made it mandatory because of another situation that we don't have to get into, but our listeners can figure that one out, what happened. So I think, that's probably going in the right direction as well.
You think it would be simple, that they don't have to say that, but I guess they do. So
Yeah.
we see it. I mean, listen, we gossip is not stranger in this industry for sure. So we've heard stories, of clients and attorneys having relationships, but I haven't had any direct contact with that.
Yep.
So that I know of. It's possible, but
I hear you.
They're more discreet than the average bear, I guess. So
yeah, but look, I just think that you've had a great run. The run continues. You're still a young woman by Florida standards. And, I hope that you continue to help people because it's really great work. And also, you've always impressed me, and I'm glad to know that you are now on the Judicial Nominating Commission for the 17th Judicial Circuit in Florida. For our listeners, can you briefly explain what that is and why you care so much to be on it and what you're doing to help society, really from behind the scenes?
Well, the Judicial Nominating Commission is a panel of 9 lawyers in Broward County that help vet candidates to be appointed to the bench by the governor's office. And we vet them, we do interviews, and we send potential candidates up to the governor for them to interview when there is a vacancy that's in between an election. So then they fill that vacancy, and then whoever is appointed, if they are appointed greater than a year before the next election, then they have to run. So they will be accountable to the voters as well. But it's very important. I mean, it is to me anyhow. It's one of my, I think the most important part of the legal process is to have good judges who understand their role as a judge and what their responsibilities are to the constituents and the people of Broward County. And I think it's just very, very important. I aspired to be a judge at one point, and when I got the opportunity to sit on the Judicial Nominating Commission, I thought long and hard about it, and I thought it's kind of a no-brainer. I can do what I wanted to do as a judge, which would be the fidelity to the law from the bench, and I would have only effectuated one seat. Now I get to help fill the seats, the vacancies, in several of them with some incredibly bright people, and I'm very proud of the work that we do on the Judicial Nominating Commission.
Yep. And I appreciate everything that you've done for the profession as well. And just for being such a nice lady. And for coming on my podcast.
Thank you.
So now I want other people like you. So if you have any in mind, let me know. That's my continuous challenge is finding guests that are interesting and engaging and that most of all will be appreciated by our listeners. But I know they're going to love you, Camille. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And come back and see us sometime in the future, okay?
Anytime, Russ. Anything for you.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks.